You say ready?
Ready. Hi everyone, I'm Sean from Animation SkillNet, and today we're really excited to be presenting Tina Nawrocki's workshop Cuphead for the Love of 2D Animation with Animation Dingle. So Tina has about over 16 years experience as a 2D animator and illustrator in gaming, television and film. Tina joined Studio MDHR in 2015 to work on Cuphead, which is the show the project you'll be hearing a lot about today, as a concept artist and a 2D animator. Once Cuphead was released, Tina then worked for 2 years on DLC, which was Delicious Last Course. And then since leaving MDHR in 2020, she's worked on the Netflix series Green Eggs and Ham, the feature film Space Jam: A New Legacy, and she recently provided original animation for Drake's music video, Knife Talk. So we really hope you enjoy the workshop, and I'll hand you over to Tina.
Hello, everyone. How's it going? Nice to meet you. I am Tina Nawrocki, as you just heard, and I will be doing a talk about the video game, not the TV show, Cuphead, for the love of 2D animation. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully it works. All right, I think that's working. You guys can see me and you can see my presentation, which is awesome. I'm going to open up the chat and I will be taking questions as I go. So if there are any questions, please feel free to shout them out and I'll try and answer them as I go through my talk. So as you heard, I am a 2D animator and concept artist. I joined Studio MDHR in 2015, and I was the 4th animator to join the team. Only 5 animators worked on Cuphead in the end. I designed and animated the level Sugarland Shimmy with Baroness von Bon Bon. I also did a lot of the mini bosses for King's Dice's final fight with the cards, and I designed a lot of run and gun characters as well. In total, I designed over 60 characters for the video game Cuphead. You can see them all on this one image, so you don't have to ask me which ones I did. In total, I animated on paper over 9,000 drawings for the game. And as mentioned before, I've worked on other projects since Cuphead. This is a shot for a little short called Jasper J. Pumpkinhead. It is owned by Brian Kessinger, who is an amazing illustrator. If you don't know him, please do check out his work. It's about a little scarecrow called Jasper, and I hope you will, follow me and follow Brian to see the progress of this short. All the rough animation is done and finished, and now, of course, we're waiting to see what happens with the backgrounds, the color, post-production, and all that good stuff. Also, because this was animated on paper, when Brian Kessinger makes a Kickstarter to finish the short, you will be able to purchase original drawings from it. So, keep in mind that and take a look when it does come out. I also worked on a feature film recently, which is Space Jam: A New Legacy. This is my favorite shot that I did from the film. It features, I think, 27 walk cycles, all going backwards in perspective. So that was a really fun one. I love walk cycles, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. So I actually really enjoyed this shot. So in this talk, I will be talking about the video game Cuphead. I will also be breaking down the 1930s style of cartooning. Obviously, we were very passionate at Studio MDHR to make sure that the video game follows exactly the style of those Fleischer and old Disney cartoons. And so I'll break it down for you guys so that you know what defines the 1930s style. Next, I'll be talking specifically about the run and gun levels and more particularly Perilous Piers, which is one of my favorites because I got to animate every single character in the game. I also in this level, and I also got to animate even the little special effects. So the waves of water in the background, that's me as well. So I'll chat a little bit about that. And then I'm going to talk about my favorite character in the game, which is Baroness von Bon Bon. She was my first assignment. So Sugarland Shimmy was the first thing that I did when I started the game. And she is still my favorite and the character I most identify with because she's sweet as sugar, but also just a little bit of a bitch. So, a great character, and I will chat about her concept and her development throughout the video game. And then finally, I'll be talking about deaths and attacks. One of the great things about Cuphead as a game, it is very, very, very difficult. And part of the reward of actually defeating a boss or killing something is to see the very fun original animation that comes with it. So that's I guess the joy of Cuphead, though it's really hard. You do get rewarded by some beautiful visuals when you do succeed in killing something. So deaths and attacks will be the final stage. I want to talk a little bit about Studio MDHR as a team. It was an amazing team to work with. The backgrounds were all done in watercolor paint by hand. And one of the reasons is that Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, the art director and lead game designer of the studio, and also the heads of the studio, the Moldenhauer brothers, really wanted to create a video game as if it had been made in the 1930s. So as much as humanly possible, we try to stick to traditional methods of what animated shorts and, to get exactly that same feel, which means that all the backgrounds were hand painted on watercolor paper by one artist called Caitlin Russell. And she is absolutely superhuman. Every single background you see in the game was hand drawn and hand painted by her alone. So a force to reckon with. There was also some 3D maquettes in Cuphead, which were never made in a software. They were always hand sculpted and then shot in stop motion. So they were created by a local craftsperson called Ali Morby. He's absolutely amazing. He usually does custom signage, custom furniture, but for the production of Cuphead, he made our custom maquettes. So he created the tower that you see in Grim Matchstick's level, that a rotating pyramid in the background with Dimji the Great. That's also his maquette, and it was all hand painted by Caitlin afterwards. And he also learned bookbinding specifically to create that opening Cuphead book at the very beginning of the game, which kind of is an homage to those old intros where you have an opening storybook to tell the story of the short that's going to appear next. So he learned bookbinding specifically for that. A wonderful member of a team and extremely, extremely talented. So what defines the 1930s style? The animation, also wanted to stick really, really close to the actual, stylistic choices of the 1930s. And the beginning of that is to do a lot of research. I watched hundreds and hundreds of 1930s cartoons. There are many, many out there, so that's what's amazing. There's, a plethora available to watch. YouTube has a lot of them. A lot of them are open source, so you can really, have a good time and go see them frame by frame. So every morning I'd make myself a cup of coffee and I would, get my day started by putting on a Betty Boop short or any other type of short from Van Buren Studios or Columbia Pictures, and, get all that absorbing of the art style in there. And when I was doing the animations, I would also look at, original 1930s characters, see them frame by frame, see how we were moving, and try and emulate that style in my own art. And so did the other animators on Cuphead, which makes it feel so authentic. A bit of history about the 1930s style. So this was the Great Depression, and of course we're emulating Western animation, so that what was going on in the United States. And at the time, there was no animation schools. You couldn't hire animators to do the job because it was a job that did not exist. So where they looked for people to hire in the studios were newspaper comics. It was all the artists that worked in the newspapers. And for example, some of the ideas for cartoons started with newspaper comics. Popeye the Sailor Man is originally a comic strip by E.C. Segar. And then it was adapted by Fleischer Studios to become, the well-known and well-loved cartoon. A fun fact is that the spinach gag, where Popeye the Sailor, eats a lot of spinach and then becomes super strong, that was actually not part of the original comic, but it was an invention of Max Fleischer himself. So, fun fact right there. Another sidebar to the comic book style is that comics were painted with black ink on white paper and then printed in the newspapers. So the early cartoons, and this is Felix the Cat, were done in the exact same way. Even the backgrounds were drawn over and over and over on every single frame. It took them a while to switch to cell, which is, a transparent piece of paper, so if you will, and then you would paint on that. So at the beginning, the style of cartoons that you would see was very similar to the comic book characters, and a lot of the times they were just black characters with black hands and black bodies. And so the question is, why did cartoon characters suddenly have white gloves on? Which is something that I have here as a prop. I use it for drawing, but why the white gloves? And it's very simple. At the very beginning, when the cartoons were so simple, just black and white, when you have a pose that is very out there and the hands are far away from the body, it reads very well. You can see what the character is doing. However, when you have a more complex pose, like the character on the right, who's here with Oswald, he's trying to think about something and his hands are overlapping his body, all that detail gets lost and it becomes kind of more convoluted and harder for the audience to understand what's going on. So at first they tried a solution where they would leave a tiny little white line between the black shape of the body and the black hand in order to define the hand. And as if anybody here has worked with pen and ink or just like black ink on paper, that trying to keep a tiny line between two solid masses of black ink is almost impossible and really frustrating and really hard. This is Mickey Mouse and Steamboat Willie. So as you can tell at the very beginning, he also had, just bare hands and no gloves on. So the solution was white gloves for the win. By having the hands be white, it was very, very simple to create more interesting poses, to see what was going on with the character, and to have very, very obvious things happening. And of course, storytelling moved a little bit more forward because there was more detail in the poses. As you can tell here in this fun little picture, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit still has that little white line between his body and his hand, as I was kind of mentioning at the early stages where they were trying to define the hands. But then Mickey comes in with the white gloves and that becomes the new trope. Another fun fact is a social one. Back in the 30s, it was still very, well known that if you're dancing with a lady, you should be not touching her with your bare hands. You should be wearing gloves. And people were actually appalled in the early shorts, I think in Plain Crazy, where Mickey doesn't have gloves on and he's dancing with Minnie, which is a social faux pas. He shouldn't be doing that. That's really wrong. So not only was it better for the animation, but it also was better socially that he was wearing gloves so that he could dance and touch Minnie without anybody going in shock. Another fun fact is that the upper classes, so people who had a lot of money at this time, would wear kidskin gloves. So it was a very light leather and the gloves would retain their shape nicely as they aged. Whereas the lower classes of society could not afford leather gloves and they would wear cotton gloves instead, to still follow the rules of etiquette, but they were cotton gloves. And as those gloves got old, the bottom of it would roll up. It was like a thing that would happen with cheap cotton gloves. There was this little roll that would happen as the gloves aged. So as you can tell in this illustration, Mickey has that roll at the bottom of his glove, which means that he is not from the upper echelons of society. He is definitely lower class. So fun little history there. Another thing that defines the 1930s style is simple shapes. And this is something I think all animators can benefit from when they're doing character design. So in the 1930s, animators were very new to the craft. People were just discovering things. And the easiest way to keep a character consistent and have a lot of different animators draw it the same is to keep the character simple. Have the character be simple shapes. Here you have two model sheets for Felix the cat, and you also have for Bimbo. And they are very simple character designs for a bunch of circles with some tubes maybe for, for the arms and the legs. And otherwise, almost anybody can draw this character, which was ideal for, animators that were untrained or, very basically trained as comic book artists. The next kind of defining thing about the 30s style of animation, which is also called rubber hose animation for this very reason, that at the time, it was the Wild West of animation. People were discovering new techniques every single day. And one of the techniques they discovered fairly quickly is the S and C shape. And if you're an animator, you know what that means. It means that kind of, wavy line that moves beautifully around. And they figured it out and they're like, yes, we're going to put it on everything. Another reason why they didn't, try and make these characters anatomically perfect and have, beautiful joints and things like this, is that they were not meant to be believable. This was the Great Depression, which is funny because, now we're in a pandemic. There's a similar kind of trend that even when there's a global, a global crisis going on, people still find the money for entertainment. They go out and they will shell out, the few coins that they have in order to see a film, in order to play a video game, just to forget. And so these cartoons were played right before a moving picture, so a film in the cinemas. And what they were meant to do is to lighten the mood, to make people laugh. And therefore, they did not have to be realistic. The limbs could be as crazy as you want, the characters as crazy. If Mickey is upset at a character on the other side of the screen, he can just punch his arm and it stretches, and he slaps him in the face and then it snaps back. Everybody laughs and job done. Only later with Disney's, I think it was The Ugly Duckling was one of the first, where he pushed animation to be more believable, to have other emotions in the characters, to try and get them to, to really resonate with the audience and be a little bit less slapstick. But the early 30s cartoons were definitely about that. It was about comedy. It was about jokes. The next thing I want to talk about is rhythm and loops. So the earliest 30s cartoons were silent. There was no sound yet. Sometimes you'd have a man on a piano playing live while the cartoon was being played. And then with Steamboat Willie, it was the first cartoon that was timed to a beat, to music. It was in 1928 that it came out. And that was, amazing. People were thrilled, like, wow, Mickey's dancing to the beat. It's incredible. It's magical. It's wonderful. So this kind of musicality was something that became synonymous with the early 30s cartoons because it was a new, cool, amazing thing, and people tried to show it off as much as possible. So this is The Merry Dwarfs, which is one of my favorite early 30s cartoons, which I'm going to play for you now, which has that awesome dancing to a beat kind of aesthetic that was very much about showing off the fact that drawings can move to music now. New and exciting. Oh, I love this. This is the stuff that makes me tick. We're so good. So the second part of this, this little talk is talking about loops. So a loop, for anybody who is not in animation, is when an animation starts on a frame, something happens, and then it ends on that same frame, so that you can play it over and over in a sequence, and it looks just fine. It looks seamless. And it is a loop. For anybody who has worked in video games or played video games, you know that there are many, many, many loops that happen in video games. There are run cycles, walk cycles, idle cycles, idle being when a character is kind of standing around and doing nothing. So loops are a huge part of video games, but they were a huge part of 30s cartoons for the very reason that it was the Great Depression. It was, almost, it hasn't changed now. People want to cut costs as much as possible, but create as much footage as possible in the shortest amount of time. They were producing an immense amount of these cartoons in a very short period of time. And one of the ways to cut costs is to create animation loops, to play something over and over again and kind of pad the time a little bit. It's only a certain amount of drawings, but you get to use them over and over again. And I'm going to play you A Silly Symphony by Ub Iwerks, and you don't know who he is amazing. He was Disney's right-hand man in the early days. It's called The Skeleton Dance. I think a lot of people know this one. It's very famous, but look at the amount of loops that Ub Iwerks uses. There's, a whole bunch of loops at the very beginning, just played over and over and over again with a nice panning background. And this is great. It's just flipped. It's the same animation, but he just flipped it. So much time, so much cost was cut. Okay, we could watch this forever, but that's kind of made my point of what I wanted to tell you guys. Next, I want to talk about the amazing expressions that 1930s, characters had. So this is something that is one of my pet peeves. A lot of young people got really excited about the 30s style after Cuphead launched, but they think that, okay, we'll just, draw a little heart-shaped face in white and slap a pie eye on. Pie eye basically means it's a black pupil with a triangle that's cut out of it, kind of like a pie, which is a very graphic representation of a highlight in an eye. And they think like they'll do that and they'll slap it on there, and that makes exactly, the 30s style. I have it down. But it's a lot more complicated than that. There was quite a lot of amazing expressions that the 1930s artists drew. There was amazing facial features. And that was one of the things that Chad and Jared Moldenhauer really were adamant about, that they didn't want two characters in Cuphead to have the same face. Every single one of those characters you saw that I drew at the very beginning has a different face, has different eyes, different noses, different mouths. There was a huge variety of character designs in the 30s. And I think it's really nice when we pay homage to that certain style and history, not to simplify it just to that one style of eye and then call it a day and say that that makes it 1930s. So I encourage you, if you are into this style, to take a look, to go through, all these different lovely shorts, and to screen grab the expressions that you find are most entertaining and most weird, and use that as inspiration for your own characters. So, one of the things that makes Cuphead a very original game is the fact that everything was hand drawn on paper, which means flipping paper the good old school way and then scanning it all into the computer. Here I am working on a hot dog mini boss for Funfair Fever. And I was blonde at the time. I was going through my little Marilyn Monroe phase. So yeah, you can tell that it is true. It wasn't drawn digitally. It was, hand drawn first and then hand inked on paper, which means a lot of ink and a lot of paper. This is a lovely shot from the Gertie the Dinosaur little documentary film. If you haven't seen it, it's really lots of fun. They're obviously making fun of how much paper and how much ink it takes to make an animated short, but this is pretty on point, seeing that I did 9,000 drawings for the game, and I was only one of 5 animators who worked on the production. So the inking was all hand-drawn on paper by our inker, Maya Moldenhauer, who's also a producer at Studio MDHR. And kind of like Caitlin Russell, who did all the backgrounds herself, she single-handedly inked the whole game, which is absolutely an amazing feat, just the amount of drawings that it took. Here's a lovely video time lapse of Maya working away, inking. She also had 2 babies during production. So there are 2 Moldenhauer children that were born during the production of Cuphead. I think as a joke, how in Pixar, at the end of the credits, they have production babies and they list all the children that were born during production, like the children of the people who worked on it. And so we have actually production babies in the Cuphead credits. So the 2 children that were born through Maya. She also was insane when the second child was born. She took 24 hours off and then was inking the next day, like holding the child in her arms while inking. So she's absolutely insane. And, just to parallel that lovely image of Gertie the Dinosaur, this is an actual image of all the animation drawings that I created for Cuphead. So there they are, physically piled up. That's what 9,000 drawings looks like. So this is something that used to be a shocker. It is not anymore. During pandemic, everybody has had to learn how to work remote. Most studios have moved to a remote setting. But back in the day, back in 2015, it was not something that was usual. Most video games were made live in a studio where everybody knows each other and like has lunch together and works in the same space, whereas we worked remote. So part of a reason was because 2D animation is not as popular in the West, or was not as popular in the West, I should say, back then. So it was hard to find young 2D animators that could be part of this very kind of up and coming unknown project, which didn't have a lot of clout at the time. So I was the only animator in Toronto, Canada, whereas we had 2 animators in San Francisco. We had 1 animator in Vancouver, Canada, and also 1 animator in LA. So we were a little bit all over the place, which was really fun. But hilariously, when we did meet for the first time face to face, it was at the Cuphead launch party in LA. We all flew there to celebrate the fact that Cuphead had launched, and it was the first time the studio had met face to face. And what was great about it is that we all got along super well. So I think it was a match made in heaven. Everybody was really great to see live. Although I was shocked that so many of them were so tall. I'm tiny. I'm 5'2", and 2 or 3 of our animators are just giants. They're really huge. Joseph Coleman and Jay Clark especially are really, really tall. So I was like, craning my head to say hello. So now I'm gonna chat a little bit about the run and gun section of Cuphead, which I got to be a part of a lot. It was a lot of fun. So a lot of shorts in the 1930s, if they weren't around a very kind of well-known character like Mickey Mouse or Oswald the Lucky Rabbit or Felix the Cat, they were about a theme. There was a lot of these thematic shorts. Almost every theme you can think about, there was a short made in the 1930s. They were milking all of the ideas. Springtime, candy, Halloween, Christmas, flowers, Easter, under the sea, ducks, anything that you can think about, there was a 1930s short made about it, or several, because several studios would use the same idea and make a short. So a huge amount of references, and this was a similar approach to the run and gun levels. Unlike the boss fights, which were kind of really well thought out in advance, the first stages of the creative process for the run and gun levels was we have a theme, and we're going to create concepts surrounding a theme. So for example, Chad would come to me and say, okay, we are doing a run and gun level that is in a forest around trees. Draw as many characters as you possibly can surrounding this theme. So the first thing I would do is I would write a list. I love lists. So I would write all the ideas I can think of characters that would live inside of a tree. I would find like maybe 10, 15 ideas. And then I would call up my secret weapon, which is my older sister, who is not an animator or an artist at all. She is a PhD historian that is now a professor. And I would call her up and I would ask her for some more ideas when it comes to, what could live in a tree. And for some reason, I have no idea how her brain works, but she would find tons and tons of ideas. And you can see wherever I have a tick next to the list, that is the things I actually ended up drawing. So I had all of these ideas, I would pick my favorites, and then I would draw them. So this was for Perilous Piers. I call it a barrage of concepts because that's basically what it is. I would just dump drawing after drawing after drawing after drawing to Chad and Moldenhauer, and then they would pick some of her favorites, or tell me, at some point to stop. So one of the amazing things about 30s cartoons is that not only, live things can be a character, so an animal or a human, but also any type of object that's just sitting there could become sentient and can be a character. Like you see my little can of worms here. Another sidebar, when I was researching 30s cartoons, it seems there wasn't a lot of female characters. There was always a love interest, right? If there was a main character in a 30s cartoon, there would be a female character that was his main love interest, but there wasn't any kind of many cartoons surrounding, female characters or women. And then when you have these theme cartoons, sometimes they'd appear quite rarely. So I tried to make it, my duty to also create some fun female characters that I would put in my concepts, hoping that Chad and Jared would also pick them. Like you have my sassy anchor here, which is lots of fun. More concepts, some of the ones that I really enjoyed. I think the bucket of fish was a really fun one. It could have been really stinky. I like these. These are like one of my favorites from his passive concepts. These are my 1980s inspired 30s style workout poles. I thought they could like do a little workout routine, but that didn't make the cut. And here we have, a bunch of other characters. You have a bench. You have the very happily married Mop and Bucket. They've been married for over 10 years, at least. And so after, I drew a ton of these, Chad, which I drew up top on the left-hand side, would like yell at me, "Stop, we're done." And so, I would stop. And then they would have a think about it. They would look through all these concepts, talk about gameplay and game design with Jared Moldenhauer, and they would come back with very specific requests. So now they know that in this level, there's going to be a barnacle, and it's going to be spewing spiky things to hurt Cuphead and Mugman. So can you please send us a bunch of concepts for barnacles? And so this is what I did. And then they chose their favorite, which was the one at the bottom level, next to last. And then same thing with starfish. They were like, "We want some starfish to be in this level. Can you design a whole bunch of starfish?" And that was another little task where I designed a whole bunch of options for the starfish. And then finally, my favorite part of any run and gun level, which is the mini boss, which is again, not maybe as epic as one of the boss fights, but it is still a character that has kind of more development to it and more meat. And this is through Base Camp, which is the portal that we used early on in Cuphead to kind of organize ourselves remotely. And so here is the kind of request from Chad Moldenhauer, including a lovely thumbnail sketch that he drew to show me what the level would look like. So I was supposed to do Captain Lobster, or he could be a crab. And he wanted him to be a seafaring man and also have either some traits of a fisherman or of a sea captain. So I made a passive concepts of crabs. And as you can tell, I kind of went for the fisherman route here. I would give him a little pipe or a little raggedy hat or something that would kind of give that feel that he's an old, aged fisherman. And then I did a whole bunch of lobster designs, also, kind of either being a sea captain or being, like a first mate or also a fisherman. So finally, the one that appealed most to Chad and Jared was the one at the very bottom, right-hand side. And then they would come with a pass of like feedback and just like little tips that they wanted to be slightly different. So here they want him to be standing upright. They wanted the claws to be a bit bigger and the head a tiny bit smaller, and also have antenna coming out of his hat. So then I would do a new pass, kind of polishing the concept, making sure that Chad and Jared are happy with him. So it seems that the one on the top left looked too drunk. The one on the top right, according to one of them, looked like a pedophile. I don't know why. I think maybe its smile was a bit too creepy and weird. And then finally, the one at the very bottom was the one that was approved and liked by all. So one of the things that I do in my animation process is that I always record reference footage. It's something that I encourage all young animators to do, and even older animators who forget about the benefits of reference footage. So I don't have the reference footage for Captain Lobster. I think I deleted it by accident, but here's a video of me shooting an umbrella, which was reference footage for Baroness von Bon Bon's shooting animation. I'm doing little pew pew sounds, which thankfully did not come up in this video, but you can imagine them as you go. So after I do reference footage, I always draw at least two passes of thumbnails, just trying to plan out how the movement goes. When you do reference footage, you can really, scrub through the video, see how much timing happens, but also like there's sometimes little tiny things that you do that surprises you, which you can add into your animation. And then I would do a rough pose test for Chad and Jared. So this is done on paper. It's kind of very dark because I use something called non-repro blue to do my first rough phase. So it doesn't come up very, very well, which is great when you do your final pencil line. So this kind of fades in the background. but this is a rough blue pencil test, and it's only the keys, and it's just showing the basic proportions of a character. It's showing the basic movement, and also I would send this early phase to Chad and Jared just to be sure that this makes sense to them gameplay wise. It's, you know, it's the right timing. It would work with the level that they had in mind. And if that was approved, I usually do my rough in-betweens, which here you have, you know, the timing charts are all in the corner, and you have my rough in-betweens gone. And then I do a second phase with overlapping action. And overlapping action, for those of you who don't know animation terms, it's anything that is affected by the main movement of the body. So this would be, you know, clothing, hair, capes, anything like that. So for Captain Lobster, it's definitely his beard, it's his hat, it's his little antenna. And then sometimes we would have a pass of special effects. So not every character has this pass, but I thought it'd be really fun if there would be some water effects. So I kind of quickly drew this water effect to sell the idea to Chad and Jared, and they liked it. So here is, again, still rough, so still, you know, drawn in blue pencil, but now I have all those details, like fun little details that I added in at the end, and I have, you know, still the water as a very rough kind of pass. And then I have him tied down with HB pencil. So, you know, all the details are moving beautifully, and the water is still in rough phase. And then I have the final, which is the water all nicely tied down and Captain Lobster all nicely tied down. Now I'm going to play a little clip of Captain Lobster in all his glory in the game. So if you have played the game and you have played this level, I apologize for any PTSD that this might incur, because it is a really hard one to get through. But there he is. You can see my little starfish guys. There's Captain Lobster. Ta-da! So that's how it looks in the final. Okay, so now I will be talking about my favorite character in the game, which is Baroness von Bon Bon. She was one of my first assignments when I joined Studio MDHR, which was a match made in heaven, really, because we said we want a candy princess. And I love sweets. I love sugar. I love baking. I love candy. So I was super thrilled and super excited that they picked me to be a part of this level, even though they didn't know me at the time. So that was wonderful. It was just something that worked out really, really great. She's also a character where I put a lot of my own personality in her, and I think that kind of shows through in the end product. So this was the base camp assignment that I got from Chad Moldenhauer when I started working on this level. So they want like a you know, carnival candy old time theme. They wanted her to be a princess right away, and it was candy themed. And they were you know, giving me great references to look at also when I was starting out. So they already had like a very good idea of what some of the mini bosses was going to look like. This is great always to see the kind of the concept, you know, thumbnails from directors, because they draw super well, as you can tell. I love the bottom one where it's like Cuphead running away and the castle turns into a monster, and there's a little note that says, "That's a great drawing." Very true. It was very evocative though, like you really could tell what was going on. So right here, they already knew they wanted something like a gobstopper to be going around and like, you know, a wave pattern. They already knew that they wanted a waffle or a chocolate bar to explode into little pieces. And then the last one, which became the cupcake, something that like goes in a different type of pattern around the level. So not only did we try and make Cuphead as 1930s as humanly possible, but also anything that was included in game had to be historically accurate in the sense that we didn't want to slip in anything modern. So all the candy that you see in Sugarland Shimmy was around in the 1930s. I had to do a lot of Wikipedia research to make sure that the candies that I was drawing in my concepts were not perchance invented later on. So for example, the jelly bean was invented in, I think, 1836. So a lot earlier than you think. So a lot of candy, thankfully, was around for a really long time. I also researched old packaging to see how that would look. You know, Pez was around in the 1930s, which is really funny to me. So research, and which also kind of brings it again to that obsessive authenticity that Cuphead has. Another inspiration for Baroness von Bon Bon, which some people picked up on, but some people did not, is that when I think of a candy princess, I always think of Marie Antoinette, which of course was a historical figure who was misquoted to have said, "Let them eat cake," in response to the fact that the peasantry in France were starving and didn't have any bread to eat. Obviously, she was very spoiled. She did have some great qualities, there's a lot of things about her that people kind of gloss over, but she did not say that. However, in pop culture, it has kind of stuck to her. So "let them eat cake" makes it seem very much as if she is a candy princess. So because Marie Antoinette was an inspiration, this is why Baroness von Bon Bon has a severed head. As we all know, Marie Antoinette died tragically at the guillotine and her head was sliced off. So this is why Baroness von Bon Bon can chuck her head around and slice it open every now and when she feels like it. Another inspiration for, Baroness was actresses of the time. So I was thinking to myself, if I was an animator in the 1930s, I would be looking to contemporary actresses that everybody loved and knew, and that would inspire the character design. So I looked to Betty Grable. I loved her victory roles. Her hairstyle is really great. It has that kind of pompadour look, which is, that little kind of donut that Baroness, or like cinnamon bun that she has on top of her head, basically is mimicking victory roles. For Bebe Daniels and Loretta Young, what I loved about them is they had this very doll-like features and face. You had the tiny lips, you had the big eyes, and those tiny eyebrows. So that was definitely an inspiration for Baroness. And then finally, you have Letty Linton, who is on the right-hand side of the screen. And she had that more of a femme fatale feel to her. So very kind of badass, very don't touch me. And I love that about her. And I wanted kind of that to reflect in Baroness. I wanted her to be sweet, but also to be a bit of a badass and kind of intimidating. The dress that Letty Linton is wearing in this last shot is also a kind of an inspiration for Baroness's dress. So of course, as before, I mentioned that Chad actually had several candy themed shorts that he wanted me to look at for inspiration. The biggest inspiration, which people kind of clue in on very often, is the Cookie Carnival by Disney, which is a silly symphony, and it's a kind of a Cinderella story about a cookie who wants to be part of a beauty contest. So that one definitely was a huge inspiration for Baroness, but also an inspiration for the backgrounds. I know that Caitlin Russell looked to Cookie Carnival for her inspiration, how to paint the background for Sugarland Shimmy. But also, pardon me, hydration is important. Candyland by Ben Burns Studios was another inspiration, a very good short if you haven't seen it. Bon Bon Parade by Columbia Pictures, and Somewhere in Dreamland by Fleischer Studios. So all four of these were definitely inspiration for how they drew candy, what type of candy was popular in these shorts, and also how they drew characters. So this was my very first pass of concepts for Baroness. As you can tell early on, she has these donut sleeves. She had a crown. She also had the little princess hat as an ice cream cone. And I said, the cotton candy could be at the very bottom. I explored different hairstyles. As you can see, I was kind of, looking to those actresses that I had looked around. And so, at the beginning, her hair definitely went through an evolution. I also had her, instead of, holding a candy cane, I had her holding a lollipop, which I thought could double as a mirror because she's a little bit vain and self-centered. So why not, have her check herself out. Then Chad requested that I do another version of Baroness who is a little bit more fluffy to see how that would look, because obviously, if she ate a lot of candy, she might be a little bit more curvaceous. However, I think the consensus was that this design started to look a little bit more modern and less 1930s than the early one. And also there is that quote, "You can never trust a skinny chef." So he thought that, the slimmer version of Baroness might be the way to go. So finally, another pass of concepts was requested by Chad to actually make Baroness completely built of candy. So what would she look like if every limb, every piece of her was candy? And here we have her as a gingerbread cookie, as a lollipop head, you know, Twizzler arms, and, you know, like a jelly skirt or a cake bottom. So definitely this was a little bit weird and far-fetched, and it didn't make the cut. However, the middle dress is the one that was like the almost final design of Baroness's dress. So there was a good thing that came out of this phase of exploration. The top right picture is the first one where Baroness starts actually looking like herself. Obviously still not 100% there, but she's definitely more in line with her final character design. Whereas for the castle, I definitely got the castle's look a lot faster. These are the first thumbnail sketches for the castle, and he stayed pretty much the same throughout the concept phase. So this was my final sketch for the castle, nice and blown up. As you can tell, I kind of rough sketched Baroness in there where she would be standing, but she wasn't fully designed yet because she still is holding a lollipop. So the castle was definitely kind of figured out first. Here's the fun little idle cycle for the castle. Another thumbnail phase. So this is a wonderful sequence of animation that happens at the end of Baroness's level when she's about to attack you. So I thought it'd be really fun if she would grab her castle by the ears and then go, "Sick 'em, boy," and then, you know, that's when the castle turns into a monster. At the beginning, Chad Moldenhauer thought that this was a little bit too complicated. It took too long to have this happen, but I was like, no, trust me, it's going to be great. And so he actually caved and let me do it. And then this is what the final animation looks like. As you can see, Baroness is animated on a different level. The cake is animated actually on 3 levels. You have the front bit, you have his back, and then you have the arms that are on their own level. So a lot of paper to make this animation happen. And here is the final chase scene with Baroness throwing her head around, and also the castle kind of like crawling along. And again, I apologize for PTSD, but this is the final animation, all its fully colored glory with the beautiful backgrounds made by Caitlin Russell. So you can see kind of everything coming together in the end. Voila. Okay, we're not going to watch anymore. That's it. Okay, so the final, what is your favorite 93's cartoon? And oh, I have so many favorites. So I do love the really early ones, which is, you know, like, so for the Merry Dwarfs is one of them, definitely. I really enjoy it. I love the old Oob Iwerks, like the Flip the Frog cartoons, which are really fun. But then there's some absolutely beautiful ones that are like done by Columbia Pictures. There is, what's it called? Something Cafe. Like it's about insects, like Bug Cafe or something like that. There's a really great one about a little tiger and a little elephant, and they're like, there's a fire. There's a lot of Mickey shorts that I really enjoy. One of them is Alpine Climbers. So good. It's with Donald and Mickey and Goofy, and all of them are going up a mountain. And so that's a really good one too. So there's a whole bunch. I could like go on forever, but generally speaking, as soon as you just like type in, you know, 1930s cartoon on YouTube, you can go down a black hole of just like all of these awesome cartoons to watch. So definitely check them out and explore them on your own time because they are worth it. Okay, so deaths and attacks. This is a very similar kind of concept process that would happen then when I was just drawing concepts for the run and gun levels. Whenever there was a crazy death that needed to happen or a crazy attack, I would call my sister. I would have a few ideas on my own, but then she would come up with these insane ideas, you know, on her end. And Chad and Jared were very much aware that I was using my sister as like a bouncing off point. The wonderful death of Pip and Dot, which is with Domino, which you see on the top right corner here. They are like, you know, Dot is kicking Pip in the eyeballs, and this is definitely one of my sister's ideas, which is hilarious. So here's another one of those lists which I talk about, which is really funny if you read through them back in the day. So Poison Dart Nose, grows tusk, shoots tusks, stomp, stomp, sumo Sailor Moon. I have no idea what I was thinking there. Hula dancer, drops horseshoes, squish and eject swords. Like, you know, great ideas there. Some of it, you know, becomes quite insane, but in the end, I would draw a whole bunch of thumbnails that would be based on these ideas. So here are a huge amount for the fat demon that happens in the last level of the devil. So here is a bunch of thumbnail ideas for his attacks. Here are a bunch of thumbnails for Baroness's attack on her final kind of chase. The whole head idea was the earliest idea that we had, but Chad asked me to explore some other ideas that he thought might be fun. So I thought it might be funny if she like took her hat off and then like, you know, blew ice cream out of it, or, you know, chewed gum and like sent gum bombs. Or my personal favorite was the marshmallow, and for some reason she blows fire on it and then like throws toasted marshmallows at you. So there was a lot of ideas, but the head one was the funniest one. I especially like how like if you go frame by frame, how her head grows back in. It's the funnest part of that animation. This is for Pip and Dot, and like for some reason I was so inspired, and so was my sister, with these characters. We had so many ideas for them. So these are attack ideas for Pip and Dot. So there was, you know, using the little swing as an archery thing, using their teeth as a discus. You had them lay an egg for some reason, flying pigs, you know, God knows. There's more ideas. There was a flamingo reveal. There was them using their swing as a bat, using it as a poison dart thing. I don't know. There's a lot going on here. So here is a video of my favorite attacks based on all those like brainstorms and all those, you know, thumbnails. This is Hocus Pocus, which was my favorite rabbit. Here are the attacks from Pip and Dot that came out of like, you know, all those ideas. This one is fun because he grows a third mouth, like if you watch carefully. And this animation, I just included it because I really like it. That character was actually based on the mountain climbers from Mickey Short that I talked about. And then finally, you have my little, you know, chubby demon and his attack where he like blows a projectile out of his mouth. So for deaths, it was a very similar process. It was, again, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of exploring of different ideas. Here are different deaths for Hocus Pocus, which is the magician rabbit, who I loved because this was at the end of production and I was going slightly insane, I think. And I think his insanity like spoke through me and then went on paper. So this is why he's near and dear to my heart. This is the monkey from King Dice Fight. And I have to say that I truly love and care for every single character that I created for Cuphead. They have a special place in my heart, except for this fucker. I hate this monkey. I hate him with a fiery passion. I have no idea why I drew him. I have no idea why I designed him. He was the bane of my existence. So the only enjoyable animation I got to do of him was killing him. Killing him was the best thing that ever happened to me. So here I was having a lot of fun exploring different deaths for the stupid monkey, which I absolutely hate. And more deaths for Pip and Dot. Pip and Dot are awesome. They have so much, like, I don't know, I was feeling so inspired with them. So they have a whole bunch of different deaths that could have happened. I really like when Dot blows her top. So she blows Pip up in the air. They were crying and passing the hinky up and down. They like twist themselves into a little spiral and like completely pass out. And then there's the kicking the eyeballs one, which was hilarious, which made the cut, which made me so happy. And of course, a whole bunch of different other ideas at the bottom. And then sometimes the ideas weren't really about, you know, like a specific animation. It was more based on who the characters were. So this is the alcoholic trio from the King Dice Fight. And I thought that their death could be fun to be themed around alcohol because they are, you know, drinks. So they pass out because they were so drunk, or they spill, or they really need to pee and then they can't fight anymore. Or, you know, they explode into flame, they melt for crying because we're so emotional, or they shatter. And then for Piruletta, which is the roulette ballerina, which is, again, a little mini boss from the King Dice Fight, which I love. And I thought she's a ballerina, she's a stage actress, you know, so she has to be dramatic. So her death should be super drama. And so I drew some fun thumbnails, which super great drawings about what could be happening when it comes to her dramatic kind of exit. And then for the little chubby demon and some smaller characters, it was all about the pose in which they die, or they, like, you know, go off screen. So this one, he just falls into oblivion, and therefore I drew a whole bunch of, you know, concepts and ideas on how to have him best fall. So the lesson here is, don't go with your first idea, explore a whole variety. Sometimes the first idea is the best, and that's fine, but sometimes you will get something a lot better if you just keep going at it. So definitely thumbnails and exploring different possibilities is the way to go with anything. These are deaths for the running demons, which is really funny because they just look like they're rocking out in a nightclub in this one. But actually, no, these are death poses. So for this character, you would only like see one frame flash before he kind of dies in a little puff of explosion. So it was really fun to explore different poses that this little running demon could die in. So finally, here are my favorite deaths, a little video. This is Hocus Pocus being choked out by his own tie, which I thought was great. Oh, look at this one. Oh, that feels so good. Best death animation. This is another favorite. I love the kicking the eyeballs one. And then you have the alcoholic trio, all sad and depressed and spilt. Just can't take it anymore. And then drama, the big drama of Piruletta. And little fat guy just like falling down, which is, you know, what we were exploring in the previous thumbnails. So the most important death that I got to animate, which was really funny to me because I was not in charge of animating the devil, that was Hannah Abby Hanna, who's an absolutely amazing animator. He and I were both nominated for an Annie Award for our animation on Cuphead, and he's the one who won it. So he definitely is deserving, an incredible animator to work with, and just an incredible animator in general. Except, of course, as with all video game productions, Cuphead was supposed to end quite a few months before it did. And so Hannah had planned his wedding, which coincided with basically the very end of Cuphead production because things got pushed back so much. So he had to go and get married, therefore he could not you know, do the final devil death. And so I was asked, and I had 4 days to do it. This was the task that was given to me by Chad. It was like, this is priority number 1. Oh my God, you have to animate the devil death. We have 4 days, go. And so Gemma has just sent me another question. Do I specialize in the 1930s style? Does that mean you had creative liberty on the types of attacks? Like, he had some say on how the level would function. So yes and no. A lot of the times, the functionality of attacks were definitely pre-thought by Jared Moldenhauer and then, you know, implemented by the programmers. And therefore, I had creative freedom, you know, within that limit of like, okay, it's a projectile, or, you know, this is the type of character we want and it's shooting something. And then I could figure out how that animation works. So there was a lot of creative freedom that way. But when it comes to deaths, actually, I had all of the freedom because we just die. It's just an animation that happens on screen. So definitely the deaths were the most kind of creative animations out there because there was no constraint as to what kind of attack. But, you know, with, as you kind of saw in the thumbnails, like even just like throwing a projectile with the little fat demon, you know, how many different ways could something throw a projectile? So I did have a lot of creativity, and sometimes that you know, series of concepts would spark an idea with Chad and Jared, and they would use, I guess, the artists' ideas to inform the gameplay as well. But usually it was a bit of a back and forth, but with the deaths, it was definitely a lot of creative freedom. So priority number 1 for devil death, 4 days, everybody, here we go. So this is Hannah's key for the final phase of the devil, where the devil's like really, really big and in your face. Also, Hannah had done these little thumbnail sketches before he went to get married of what the devil could look like when he was finally defeated. So again, I went out and I did reference footage. This is awesome. This is when I had gray hair this time. I went through a lot of different colors of hair, and I was doing some reference footage of how the devil could be dying. Also, I was requested that it be a ping pong loop, which means that the loop goes the same backwards and forwards. And at the very end is where I think I hit the best expressions. Right there. Oh, that was really good. So then I take the best expressions and I do screen grabs, which are very fun and embarrassing to share as inspiration for the final death sequence. So there they are. And then I drew thumbnails of what that could look, of course, drawing inspiration from Hannah's original idea of what the devil can look like defeated, but then, you know, using my own expressions to further inform what's going on in there. And then I would draw some final keys just to show, like, you know, what that could look like to Chad and Jared. Chad had some thoughts about, like, you know, this is the first time I was animating the devil, so some things about his, you know, model, how he has to stay on model. So there was some tweaks to be had. And then I did my first pass of roughs. So again, this is a ping pong loop, which means that it's key, breakdown key, and then you play the animation backwards. So this was just like, you know, the first rough test. You know, Chad liked that. Also, we had 4 days, so we had to move it along. Here it is fully in between in roughs. And then even more details added on. And then you have it fully roughed with details. And then you have a beautiful final tie down. And I have even one more, which is what it looks like fully colored. And this was Dee Johnson, who was one of our animators, who did all the light and shadows and all that kind of good stuff. So she was animating that on top of it. So that's the final devil. So I'm almost done. I'm just going to quickly talk about some reference books that I use throughout production, also that I use generally, and I find them really helpful. Do you feel 2D traditional animation is making a research, and I'm seeing a lot of it in the student? Yes, it is. It's making a comeback. Isn't it exciting? I do think that Cuphead is part of the reason why, because like, you know, there's some great shows out there. Green Eggs and Ham that I got to work on is an amazing 2D production. Movies are doing more 2D. I think it's because Cuphead was such a runaway success that finally, whenever there was a creative who wanted to do something 2D, they could go like, well, Cuphead made money. It doesn't mean that it's 2D that people don't want it, right? So now there's a precedent and there's a reason why people can say, I want to make a 2D project. And I'm super excited that students are doing more 2D, because although 3D is a wonderful medium, I find that it's hardest to do 2D because not only do you have to have amazing acting and amazing timing, you also have to draw good. So it's the hardest medium to learn. And if you learn the hardest medium, it'll only make all of your animations better, right? So I encourage all students to do 2D films first, and then you could do all the other mediums afterwards. So back to my books. Animator Survival Kit. You know, rest in peace, Richard Williams. He passed away not that long ago. He made a new expanded edition, which is really great. It's a wonderful book to have on your shelf. It's one of those things that saves you a few times in your career when you have no idea what you're doing. If you like VFX, I could do a whole presentation just about 2D VFX. Which I loved doing a lot of the 1930s type VFX for Cuphead and DLC. There's Elemental Magic 1 and 2, two volumes by Joseph Gilland. Amazing. Joseph Gilland is one of those original, you know, Disney VFX guys who worked on paper and 2D. Amazing books, really great to have a good read. There's The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, which are two of the 9 old men who I extremely admire. The book is an amazing reference to flip through, but it's also a brick that you should read. Read it cover to cover. It's absolutely amazing. It's super, super good. And then if you love 1930s design, check out The Hidden Art of the Disney Golden Age, which is a great series of books. It goes from, you know, the 30s all the way to 40s and 50s, different concept art. It's kind of making of books, but of that era of Disney. Finally, there's a book that I swear by. It's called Movement and Form by my mentor called Samantha Youssef, who is an amazing animator, 2D animator. She worked at the Disney studios before it closed down. And she wrote a book about drawing for animation, how to analyze real life, how to analyze the model, and how to set up your drawings for animation. So amazing book, check it out. And then finally, if you're interested in the 1930s era in general, read more about it. There's a lot of fun information out there. These are two books that are not picture books or good reads that I recommend. One of them is Out of the Inkwell by Richard Fleischer, which is a biography of Max Fleischer, his father. A little bit of a sad story, but fascinating. So really cool to check it out. And then there's The Hand Behind the Mouse, which is about Ube Iwerks, who I briefly talked about in this presentation, who was Disney's right-hand man. He animated single-handedly Plain Crazy and a few of the first Mickey Mouse shorts. He's also the designer of Mickey Mouse. So he was the one who drew Mickey Mouse for the first time. He left Disney for a while to work on Flip the Frog, his own production, but then rejoined Disney later more as an inventor than as an animator. So he created this amazing camera for them and a bunch of other things. Really cool guy, a genius. Check it out. And then finally, I support your favorite animator. I have an Etsy shop. It's called Tina's Caricatures. You can also just put Tina Nawrocki in Etsy and you will find me. I do prints. They're in color, they're in black and white. I did a whole series of travel prints. Whenever I'd be invited to a country, I would draw custom prints, and hopefully one day I could come live to Ireland for next year's festival and we can meet up and I'll draw some Irish prints for then. But otherwise, you can check out my stuff, you can buy some prints and support your favorite animator. Also, some more shameless self-promotion. Follow me on all of the things. I have a Twitter at Nawrocki Tina. I have an Instagram, Tina Nawrocki Art, and I have a blog that I sadly have not updated in years, but I probably should. However, it does have some Cuphead development stuff on there that you could check out. It's called Tina Nawrocki at blogspot.ca. Also, if you want to hear more about DLC that's coming out this summer, do follow Studio MDHR. They have a website and also a Twitter handle at Studio MDHR. And that's me, you guys. So if there are any more questions, I think we still have some time, or not. We have past time. I know I'm the last talk though. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask them to me. Otherwise, we will be wrapping this up. All right, I think it's time to finish it up. So thank you so much, guys, for listening about Cuphead, about 1930s animation, and about 2D animation in general. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you around. So bye, everyone.